All right, thanks for being with us today, everyone. Our State Advisory Council for Gifted and Talented Education. So thankful for everyone being here today. Want to begin the meeting by letting Greta Hilton, our Associate Commissioner of the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, give us a welcome message.
Hi, good morning. Do I need to move?
Nope, it'll pick you up.
Okay, all right. Good morning. As Joe said, I'm Greta Hilton, the Associate Commissioner for the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. And I just wanted to swing by and say, thank you to all of you who dedicate this time in providing, the advice and support to the office and the staff and for everything that you do for our students with exceptionalities across the Commonwealth. And I see a little person there that has come to join the meeting. Oh, that's
With
so
Lindsay,
sweet.
yep.
So sweet. Hello. That's sweet. And summers are hard. So, if you don't reach quorum, it's completely understandable. But it's still important to plow forward because the work that you do still does an immeasurable amount of support to the work that Kathy leads. And we're so thankful to have her here on the team. And then, we rely completely on her to support the entire state. So it's, no pressure, Kathy. But that's another reason why you guys are so very valuable. So I just wanted to swing by and say that and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Greta.
Thank you. So I will turn it back over to Joe to go ahead and get things started.
Thanks, Greta. I just want to review our meeting norms real quick. Just remember to keep your camera on for members. Members must speak when called on for roll call or any voting. The meeting's being recorded. Remember to stay focused on the topic agenda at hand for the sake of time. There is a raise your hand and chat feature if you want to ask questions or provide comments. Additional feedback is provided through the meeting exit slip. I will provide a link at the end in the chat and also through email. There is a note here about our secretary taking notes. That was Tim Travis. Tim is no longer with us. His term expired, and so he has chosen not to be reappointed. And so Kathy's going to talk a little bit about trying to find somebody to help us take notes in Tim's absence. But do remember that Kathy and we store and manage documents in our Google folder, and then we provide access to that information through email. And so I think that has our meeting norms. And
Do we need to ask for a volunteer to take notes today, Joe?
Yeah, and next is roll call of members. But before we kick that over to Dr. Roberts to do the roll call, do we have any volunteer who would help us with taking notes? And Kathy, I don't know if this person will be officially the secretary, but just for this meeting, maybe, right?
Right, it'd just be for this meeting, then we can address that maybe at the next meeting in September.
Okay, any volunteers on notes for today?
You don't have to write down every single thought, as you can see from the other minutes, just the big rocks, big things that went on, such and such was discussed, that kind of thing. That'd be great if somebody would do that.
Are you all looking just for like a Word document?
Yes.
Sure. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Katie. Katie Booth is going to take notes for us, and then you can just make sure and send that to me and Kathy, and we can help format and get that in place. So we really appreciate that. And others can about that position once we get September, right? Is that what you mentioned? Is that
Yes.
Meeting we'll try to get a formal vote on that position. Right. So Katie, thank you so much. So now we'll turn it over to Dr. Roberts, and she will do a roll call of members. And Dr. Roberts, you can give a little welcome for us too as well. Thank you for being with us.
Well, good morning to each of you. We've almost hit the middle of July, so summer is rapidly moving along. And as we start out, I'm going to read the purpose of the Advisory Council for us to keep front and center as we talk. The State Advisory Council for Gifted and Talented Education is hereby created and attached to the Kentucky Department of Education. The Council's purpose is to make recommendations regarding the provisions of services for gifted and talented students in Kentucky's education system. Very important responsibilities for all of us. I will call roll. Katie Booth,
Present.
Shadidra Bradford, Lindsay Burton,
Present.
Kimberly Code, Brandy Corbin, Byron Tarnell, Mason Dyer,
Here.
Hannah England,
Here.
Kirk Haynes, Philip Cash, Emily Lawson, Jean Lee, Pauline Lorenzo, Tiffany Marshall. Did I hear you, Pauline?
Yes, you did. Present.
Thank you. Tiffany Marshall, Brenda Martin, John Maxey, Kim Nettleton,
Here.
and Julia Roberts here. I thank each of you for being here. We all are having probably very busy summers here at the Center for Gifted Studies. We've just started our 6th week of residential programming with one more to go. So you can picture it's pretty busy right here on the WKU campus with activities for gifted and talented children. The minutes of the last meeting, have you all taken the opportunity to look at those? And assuming you have, do you have any suggestions, revisions?
I do have a question. Is this in reference to the April 13th meeting agenda or the June the 7th?
Oh, that's a really good question, Hannah. Let's say it's with the April meeting first.
Okay, I noticed my name, I was in attendance, but my name was left off.
Oh, well, we can't have that. We'll certainly add you to the
Okay, thank you.
minutes that
Sorry
were.
about that, Anna.
That's okay. Thank you.
We can add that on the April 13 meeting minutes.
Any other revisions? Is there a motion to approve the minutes with that addition?
Pauline Covington, motions to approve.
Thank you. A second?
I will second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor of accepting the minutes with that one revision, say aye.
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 And I'm assuming there aren't any no's in that. But speak up if you're a no. So let's look at the minutes of the June meeting. Are there any changes that you see need to be made?
And keep in mind, that was our special called meeting focusing on the GSSP Infinite Campus work proposal.
Very important work. A motion to approve the minutes from our special called meeting.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes from the specially called meeting.
Thank you, Kim. A second? Boy, it'd be easier if we were looking each other in the face, wouldn't it? For someone to raise their hand and say, I'll second that. For the sake of the minutes, who will second that motion?
It's Lindsay Burton. I'll second it.
Hi, Lindsay. Thank you. All those in favor of the minutes, the recording of the session, say aye.
Aye.
And those
Aye.
opposed, no. So we have approved both sets of minutes of the advisory council. Kathy, I believe you're up to share with us any information you wish. It says grant funding, so perhaps you can tell us how those increased funds are going to be allocated.
Be glad to do that. And I think Joe's going to put a PowerPoint up there to help us and keep yours truly on track.
All right, I will get that ready in just a second.
It's very exciting that we have an increased $3.8 million from the General Assembly to increase our funds to $10 million. We were at 6.2 for the last several years, so it's very exciting that we have more funds for districts to expend.
All right, Kathy, do you see the presentation?
I do. So if you'll just move forward another slide there, Joe, that would be excellent. So just got some bulleted points here that I want to share with you guys. So as I stated before, the formula to calculate gifted and talented state funding for the allocation of this coming school year, 2022 to 2023, has been revised. It was revised, based on, like I said before, we received $3.8 million more. So we felt like this was a good time to look at how funds were allocated to districts. So it was decided that every school district will receive a base amount, regardless of size, of $20,000 per district. And then in addition to that base amount, the formula allocates a per student rate based on the previous school year's total enrollment. Go to the next slide, please, Joe. So this is for the 2022-2023 school year only, because as I said before, the per student amount is based on the total enrollment. And so the total enrollment might change for the school year of 2023 to 2024. So we would be getting a change for that. There might be a change, and so districts might, have a different amount that will be allocated for the next school year. And if you want to see what those allocations are, they are posted on the state grants webpage. On that webpage, there is a spreadsheet that lists all the different non-competitive grants, and you'll see on that webpage that GT program is listed there, the Gifted and Talented program is listed there, and for each district, the amount is listed there. That was a lot of information. Just want to pause and see if there's any questions or comments.
Kathy, I have a question. I'm hearing that you say that's based on the total enrollment in the district, not total gifted enrollment. Is that right?
Correct. Are there any other questions?
Kathy, can you tell us how who made this decision? Was that purely done within KDE?
There were many people here at KDE that looked at different funding formulas in other states, and then there were lots of different discussions based on that research that was done, Dr. Roberts.
Well, I would like to add that I think it's wonderful that we have some increased funding. Lynette Baldwin worked very hard advocating in Frankfurt for that, as did some other people, but she would have been the lead in doing that. And the amount that we were advocating for was 15 million. So I would encourage folks to be thinking as you talk to legislators about 15 million in the funding 2 years from now. It's actually a year and a half from now, maybe a year from now, that we need to be talking to people about that.
Are there any other questions or comments? So I encourage you, to go to the state grants webpage, look at your districts, and see the increased amounts that were given to districts. I also want to say that if there was any district that might have been negatively impacted by this new funding, that they would be held harmless. That means that they would receive the funding that they had received for prior years, that their funding would not go down. So that's also something that I wanted to add. All right. So Joe, back to you.
Kathy, could I ask another question? With this special called meeting, and it was certainly on the agenda, and we talked about the minutes, but could you tell me any progress that we've had with GSSP at the state level online? Any updates to that?
Yes, I believe that is on the agenda.
Yeah, that's a agenda item that Kathy's going to talk
Coming
about.
late. Okay, never mind.
No, we want to address that for sure.
I think that's next on the agenda.
Yes.
Okay, back to you then, Joe.
All right.
Thanks.
So yes, thank you, Dr. Roberts, for bringing that up. That was very timely. So I just want you to know that the feedback from the council was shared with the associate commissioner, and we are in the process of looking at that feedback. And once I have some more updates about that, and once that is also shared with the other districts across the state, then we'll have another update on that in our next meeting. Did anybody have any other questions that they wanted to express about, the Gifted Student Service Plan? If there was anyone that wasn't at the last meeting and maybe you had some questions or comments about the Gifted Student Service Plan, please feel free at this time to express those or comment or ask questions.
I don't have a question. I think this will be a huge move forward as we help coordinators and resource teachers as they're keeping records for our students.
That is correct, Dr. Roberts. I guess the one thing about the proposed change is that it will not automatically keep a history of that Gifted Student Service Plan in Infinite Campus. And we discussed that at length at our last meeting. As Hillary Morton stated, who works for the Office of Education Technology, she said sometimes when you add something has to be taken away. And unfortunately, with the new proposed change, there wouldn't be a history that would be kept automatically. You can save it and, do that for individual, GSSPs, but it wouldn't automatically save. So I did want to point that out in case we had anybody that wasn't at our meeting last week that didn't understand that from the meeting notes.
I think it's very important for all of us to remember that the law says that all exceptional children will have an individual education plan. And gifted children certainly are named in law as a category of exceptional children. And the decision was made that that IEP for gifted would be called a Gifted Student Services Plan, because the ratio of teachers to students is so different than it would be for other exceptional children. Maybe 1 to 200, 300, 400, as opposed to a number that is much smaller than that. But within our schools, the GSSP should have all of the respect that an IEP has for other exceptional children. And I think it's kind of up to us as advocates for gifted children to help others know that.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts, for that reminder. All right. So, Joe, what is next on the agenda then?
All right. Yeah. I wanted to talk about membership terms. And so I wanted each member to know when their term expires. And so we can begin to plan for replacing members who may not want to be reappointed and so forth. June 30th of each year is the date. And so we did have a few members where their terms expired. I am coordinating with Tracy Goff Herman. We coordinate with the governor's office to make sure we put in names of members who would like to be reappointed. And then also they help appoint members to make sure we have our representation spots covered. So I'm just going to pull up a document real quick, which shows all of the members and when their terms expire. And give me just a second to pull that up. The system takes just a second. Kathy, can you see that document?
And Joe?
All right, thank you. And I have highlighted the members whose terms have expired. So on June 30th of this year, and that is Katie Booth, Emily Lawson, Dr. Roberts, and then Tim Travis. Tim Travis, his term did expire. Of course, he was our secretary, but he has expressed that he has not chosen to be reappointed. And so we do have a vacancy. He is a parent of a gifted and talented student. So we have those vacancy categories listed. Dr. Roberts does want to be reappointed. So we have put that information in, and Tracy is helping us to coordinate with the governor's office. Dr. Roberts, thank you so much, and we appreciate your leadership. And so we are excited to continue with you on the council. And Katie Booth, she's wanting to also be reappointed. So Katie, we will put your name in. And then Emily Lawson.
She's moving and out of state, so she will not be able to.
Emily Lawson is moving out of state, so her term has expired and she will not be reappointed. And that is a category of a parent of GT student. So we will have two of those categories. We also will have a council for post-secondary education, a post-secondary education, and a visual performing arts vacancy. So we're continuing to work with Tracy Goff Herman on those to get those established. Also, Jessica Green was a member who resigned, and so we want to make sure you're aware of that. And she is the visual and performing arts representative, so we will work to get that filled. I also wanted to just make sure and list all of the other members and your terms so you know what's coming up. So you can see in June 30th, 2023, we have Brandy Corbin, Pauline Covington, Hannah England, Bryn Martin, who is our vice chair. So those are the members in 2023 coming up. And then our members for 2024, which is a couple years out, Shondidra Bradford, Lindsay Burton, Kim Code, Mason Dyer, Kirk Haynes, Philip Cash, Jean Lee, Tiffany Marshall, and John Maxey. And so we're thankful to have a couple more years with those folks. That gives us time to really, what is interesting about the term membership is how it is staggered to ensure that you have some historical representation that stays. And then you also cycle in new members to get new perspectives. And so we will continue to coordinate with the governor's office on those appointees. So I will stop presenting on that. And if you have any specific questions about term membership or any comments in addition to what we've shared today, just please let Kathy or me know, and we will definitely work to coordinate and follow up. But do you all have any questions or comments or concerns about term membership? All right, so it sounds like we will continue to work with Tracy to get the vacancies filled. And so Kathy and I work under the impression that if a term expires and we have not heard anything from the governor's office, we just continue as is until we get that communication. And so for Dr. Roberts, for example, her term expired June 30th, 2022 this year. But we have not, we have expressed she wants to be reappointed. And we haven't heard back from the governor's office, but Dr. Roberts will continue until we get clarification from the governor's office. And then we will be hopeful that she's reappointed, and we'll just continue to work on that. But she can be with us until we hear something. So that's just an example of how Kathy and I operate. So.
Right. And if you know of anyone that would like to serve on this council, I'll put in the chat the Kentucky Boards and Commissions webpage. That's where the application is. People just complete an application there and submit a resume to the governor's office, because these are governor appointed, members. So I'll find that real quick and put that in the chat so that you can have that after during the meeting, and also after the meeting, you can go back and look at the chat from this meeting.
Pauline, go ahead.
Kathy answered my question.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, we continue to work with the governor's office and the boards and commissions, and usually they will reach out somehow. They'll either send members an email or they will call, but they will follow up with members, and they will make sure that all application information is in for members. And so that is good information, Kathy. Is they like to have your information updated, because since people move, have different email, different phone numbers. So it is nice to go to that Boards and Education link to enter the new information on your application once your term expires. Kirk Haynes, go ahead, Kirk. Good to see you today. You're on mute, Kirk. Sorry.
Good morning. Wanted to make sure that you saw that I was here in attendance, having some glitchy computer issues this morning. Good to see everyone.
Glad you're here, Kirk.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
So Kathy, it looks like you're on the agenda next to talk about preparations for the upcoming school year.
Correct. Before that, I think we were maybe scheduled to take a break. Joe, did you still want to?
We can keep going. I was thinking we may have went a little bit longer, but I think we're okay to keep going. I know Katie Booth may have a question or comment. She raised her hand. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, just before we go on, I've had parents and colleagues fill out the application form or the information form previously. Is it sort of like the restaurant industry where your application just stays on file, or would prospective members of the group need to resubmit a new form?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so the information does stay on file with the governor's office. However, they do like for you to update your information. And so that's what it's always good, if your term does expire, to go to that link, do an application again, make sure your information is current. But if that doesn't happen, I think the current information rolls over, and we do the best we can. That's the information we have.
And I think, Katie, if they want to check on that, I put the number that's on the Boards and Commissions webpage there. If you've got parents, colleagues who want to check on their application, they could also call the governor's office and just kind of check in on that. And I would say probably every time we have a new governor,
yeah,
it's a good time to put in a new application because of administrative changes. So
that sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Natasha.
I just had a question kind of along those same lines, Kathy. So if someone applies, are they notified if their application is approved? Of course, if they're approved, it's notified, but they notified one way or the other. I know you said they could go out and check on the status, but how are persons notified the status of their application? That might be helpful for people to know.
as far as I know, I think you have to call to check on the status of your application to ensure it's been received. I don't know, Jody. You have
Yeah, and it varies with the governor's office administration. Sometimes they send a formal letter. Sometimes they send an email with the attached letter. Sometimes they call. But it is normal practice for the governor's office to let members know somehow that they have been selected. And then we actually get sent a formal executive order And so that is signed by the governor, and it shows the member names. And so we have that on file as well. Now, keep in mind, Kathy and I, we coordinate with Tracy Goff Herman. And so Tracy is the person who has the direct contact with that person who helps coordinate at the governor's office. And so we go to Tracy, and Tracy will send us information. And so we just want you all to feel comfortable in letting me and Kathy know. We will, if you have any questions, or if you're wondering what the communication is from the governor's office, or if you're wondering about your term or your status, then we will get with our team with Tracy and follow up on that. And so for other advisory councils, I facilitate some of our other groups. I know the governor's office has been reaching out to some of those members to let them know that their reappointment request has been received and so forth. And keep in mind, they have a lot of boards and commissions at the governor's office to go through. So they take some time and look at each group, and then they will get an executive order typed up, get it signed, and then they work on following up. But that's just kind of all of the details that we know. I'm not always sure how that plays out exactly from the governor's office, but that gives you some of the ideas of what's happened in the past. Thanks for asking that, Natasha. Any other questions or comments about term membership and boards and commissions from the governor's office? Well, again, we really appreciate your service on this advisory council. It's very important. And so we just thank you for that. And we will continue to coordinate on vacancies with our governor's office to get appointments and reappointments done. And I know you're in good hands with Dr. Roberts. She has chaired this group for a while. And so just appreciative of her leadership for this group. I think that's it, Kathy.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll go on and then maybe we'll take a break later.
Yes, sounds good.
Since we're at about 9:34. So the next agenda item is preparations for the upcoming school year. So Joe, if you'll put that those slides back up there. What we'll do is we'll talk about the priorities that we decided on last school term. And I'll also talk about some of the preparations we're making for gifted education for our districts around the state. And then really want to have some discussion about the priorities, about how you'd like to implement those, ideas about how you'd like to implement those, and then also any ideas that you have for helping districts around the state this year, especially as far as services for gifted students go, since that is our main purpose. So priority number one, just want to read that and then be thinking about how you'd like to implement this priority. So our priority was for equity on practices, identification, and services. And the statement was support identification practices that are equitable for students who are twice exceptional, English learners, all racial and ethnic groups, all socioeconomic students, and students with special considerations that presents barriers for opportunity and access. So how would the council like to go about supporting identification and practices and the rest of the statement there? And I'll just give you, several seconds to think about that, some think time, as we say in the educational practice, and then to share out your thoughts about how you would like to do that. Any ideas you might have.
And this is a brainstorming session, so please feel free to just add your ideas.
This is Kirk. I am looking at our shared Google folder. I did not see the form that Joe showed with membership terms earlier, or this slide deck. Is it somewhere in our Google folder?
No, but I will put that in there for us.
That would be so helpful, especially my screen is, I hope it appears normal to you all, but it's the screen is actually moving up and down. So it'd be easier to read if it was in the Google Drive where I could pull it up. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, sorry about any technical issues today, and I totally understand that. But yes, we will add the member term form, and we'll add this presentation to the Google folder. The meeting agenda and the minutes from April 13th and June 7th are in there right now. That's the only documents, but we will add that.
I think as I look at that statement, I think maybe a guidance document would be useful to send out to districts. We certainly have in the regulation this kind of information, but a guidance document might bring it to the forefront of their thinking if we had some kind of a statement that we could send out as the school year begins. That's really when folks are pretty fresh in how they want to approach what goes on.
In terms of guidance, are you thinking like something that would outline best practice?
I think I am.
Sounds
What
good.
would you suggest?
Yeah, I was thinking just about making sure that people understand the difference between tests that are geared toward sort of ensuring that all students, including English language learners, can, you know, actively participate to their best extent. Making sure that districts know that screening every student produces better results, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Universal screening is the key.
Before we go to Kirk's question, I wanted Natasha to just weigh in, if you could, because I know that Natasha is helping to work on guidance documents and so forth for our office. And so, Natasha, did you want to speak to that at all, and kind of what our office and what our area how we might work with that?
Sure, I can. Thanks, Joe. No, I was just taking notes here. So just listening to the feedback with regards to the first priority statement. So yeah, definitely, we do have a publication and guidance development process. So we can listen to our feedback. We look at our data, statewide data, to determine a statewide need for the guidance that we develop. So we look at that, and along with other data sources, advisory council's input, of course, being one of those things. So we will, so I'm just going to take notes and gather and listen to all the feedback here, and then we will review that, and we take it through a process of how we get it developed. So it's not necessarily something that we can do overnight, of course, but we definitely want to determine our need for guidance, our data to support that, and then take it through the steps that we use when we draft guidance for all of our students with exceptionalities and our exceptional learners. So, Joe, I hope that I answer that question, and if there's any other questions as it relates to guidance development, I would be more than happy to talk in greater detail about it. But right now, I just want to, kind of sit and listen to get the council's thoughts as it relates to the priorities, and see how we can support them moving forward with the work and their priorities.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Natasha.
Okay.
And I was wanting Natasha to kind of weigh in, because it really is a balancing act to think about the role of the advisory group, and then the work of our office. And so, as Natasha mentioned, we have a guidance document development process and review, and we get feedback on that. And so the advisory group will provide some advice on information that needs to be shared. And then it really is working with our office to help develop that, review it, and so forth. So I just want to make sure that Dr. Roberts and all the members are aware that as you think about deliverables or work that comes from this group, you do have additional, sources to go to
Yeah.
really think about how that plays out. And so I appreciate Natasha bringing
Absolutely.
it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely here to work and support with the advisory council to take their advice and feedback and kind of bring that to life as
Yep.
the need arises. Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Kirk.
I was wondering if we could include information and statewide guidance on schools or districts that use local norming.
So as a follow-up question to that, Kirk, are you asking maybe for a percentage? Or are you asking for specific districts or school names?
I have worked in a building in Jefferson County where we used local norming to identify students. I don't know what that practice is around the rest of the state, but I think local norming in some instances, very rural locations perhaps, or urban settings, actually captures the essence of what we're looking for when we use the term gifted and talented student. And it gives more flexibility and some guided control to local people to best meet the needs of their students in their schools or their communities, while still protecting the integrity of our regulations and statute.
Thank you.
Along those same lines, I think any information that we can continue to pump out about special considerations, how the process works, what documentation is needed, I think has to be helpful for districts that are seeking to ensure that their population is really reflective of, their gifted population is reflective of their population as a whole. I think especially that holds true for like low SES students. And I know that my own district went through that process over the last probably 6 or 7 years to make sure that we are identifying the students who really do need gifted services. But doing all that research and finding the resources to make it happen felt it wasn't an uphill battle or anything, but we did have to like do a lot of front work to make sure that we were doing things correctly. And so I think anything that we can do to clarify that and push out the feasibility of it to districts would be really good. It feels like local norms and special considerations really would help us sweep up more of the gifted population that we're currently missing.
Thanks, Katie. Kirk?
I like brainstorming. I don't know if it's better to include it here under priority 1 or to look at the other priorities that we set. But I think we could be extremely influential with district coordinators and district level staff if we include the language of MTSS and how that gifted students and services, actual day-to-day services for those students can be interwoven into the MTSS model And some school districts have very deep reaching and broad, long-standing work with MTSS. Some school districts are still at the typical entry point where their MTSS is focused on behavior and PBIS. So, and I'll let the staff explain the alphabet soup for non-educators on our council. I don't want to miss anything that would be important in MTSS as a system, and how there's actually a fairly well-written book about including gifted students in intervention groups. And I think we'd be remiss if we don't take an opportunity to give some very practical steps and actions that school districts could take to include gifted students in their MTSS.
Yes, thanks for that, Kirk. I think it's really interesting. It's an interesting time right now to really think about what districts are doing, especially coming out of the pandemic, where it's been very much virtual and then now on site. And with districts saying they're seeing extreme behaviors that they have not seen before. And so how are they, provided support to deal with that, both mental health and, social, behavioral, all of that. So I think it's an interesting time, and it is something that we need to look at, and that communication with our gifted and talented coordinators is critical to provide support for them. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Go ahead, Hannah.
Yes, hi. Kirk, would you happen to know the name of that book that you just mentioned?
If you give me just a second, I might even be able to put my hands on it on the bookshelf. So give me just, but it's a really great read. And I made a sales pitch to my school principal to try to, let's put some of these things in place. Give me 1 second.
Okay, thank you. Because I could see as a gifted coordinator for a smaller district, possibly doing a study of that and taking that information back to each school. And when they implement their RTI program, if this is based similar to those interventions, that they could, I could give them resources on how to implement also with the gifted prospect of it. So thank you, Kurt.
And I would add to that Toddy Adams has been implementing this system in her district for a few years, and she did her dissertation on the practicalities of implementing RTI program for gifted students. So she's a great source of information.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Pauline?
Thank you. I apologize if this question has already been asked, but I was kicked off, or I had some technical issues. With regard to creating the guidance that Natasha has been charged with, I believe it's Natasha that has been charged with this. Are there best practices, or is there information on cultural responsiveness to those assessments with regard to not only the language the student may be assessed in, but also the context in which they are assessed?
And Pauline, I do know that is a very good question. I know there is research out there. I know that is something that our staff would have to take some time to look for and see how that aligns with the guidance that we provide. And then, of course, some of the research that the group has discussed to bring in some of that information is always helpful for us. So please pass that along. But Natasha, is there anything you would add as far as the the guidance development process, and then how we look for our sources of information to support, the information that we share.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just gonna come on. I just wanted to clarify first. So we haven't been charged yet to start any projects as it relates to gifted and talented guidance as of yet. Today, I'm listening to priorities. We're taking feedback, and then again, we'll go through our process of how we begin to develop those things. We do look at research-based practices, language, and all those things as we are developing guidance. As it relates to, I think your question, if I'm understanding correctly, was related to assessments when we're assessing students for gifted education. Are those assessments culturally responsive, I believe is your question, correct?
Yes, specifically for identification.
Yeah, okay. And I think as we research and as gifted educators research and the council does research, you have to look at each assessment individually because assessments are made by assessment companies. So in every company, they develop their own assessment. So I think it's a matter of looking at this particular assessment that's being used, and is it culturally responsive? How are they taking that into consideration? So I guess from my experience, I could just say you have to look at each individual assessment to determine, how well or not so well they're doing that as it relates to culturally responsive language, and then sharing that information, or maybe as teachers advocating for that. But every assessment company is going to have their own take on that. Some do it well, some may not, unfortunately, just like, with many things. But those are things that we look at, and we can take into consideration when you look at things, or districts can take into consideration when they're looking at which assessments that they want to do or want to use for identification. So I think just like with, other curriculum and other products out there, some do it well. Some have some area to grow in that area.
I also wanted to add that I think it's valuable to note that just from the perspective as a parent, I appreciate the triangulated approach that at least my district has taken with regard to giving parents a voice and asking parents to fill out a survey and about their child, providing a platform for teachers also to provide anecdotes about what they observe in their students. That said, because we're all human and because parents don't necessarily know what or how giftedness is expressed and manifested, I would like to see more training or education on the side of the parents on, what that would look like, or even just a quick, some tips for parents, especially those whose first language is not English, and also for the gifted and talented teachers and coordinators, because I know that I'm positive that there are many, if not most teachers and coordinators are on their way to learning more about cultural responsive teaching and assessing. But I hope that continues, and teachers and parents both are enriched by that information.
Thank you for that, Pauline. And yes, those are very important areas. And that's why it's important for this brainstorming session to just get some thoughts out there. And then it will be the job of the council to then think about the priorities and kind of line them up to see what would the areas of focus be for you all, and how you would, like to order that information, and then focus, and then give us some feedback on where you'd like to go. And like Natasha mentioned, that there are guidance documents that are in the works, but it takes time. And so we get it reviewed and then kind of cycle those through. And so I really appreciate you all bringing up some thoughts about the priority statements today. And Dr. Roberts, you can begin to think about how this work plays out in the council and maybe how the work is continued, if that's in a committee or if that's in a smaller group, or how that kind of plays out to get the advisory group information back to us to really balance out how the work happens. So this is kind of the happy medium for the advisory group when you get to this point and you think about, now we have our priorities, we know what our deliverables are, how do we do the work?
And you've brought up a very important point. I almost want to go back to my initial suggestion about a guidance document and say that's a long-range plan. Maybe what we need from KDE immediately would be a message about the importance of equity that would go out not just to coordinators, but to superintendents and other district people, because that's where messages start. And within that message, I would like very much for us to consider making sure that it includes that getting students up to grade level is important, but it's equally important for every student to be learning every day in school.
Yeah, I love that.
And I'm afraid that's not the message that's out in many schools right now. And teachers need the freedom, the okay to teach all kids so they're learning while they're in school each day.
It's a great idea. The more you can communicate expectations and provide guidance, and I think that it carries a lot of weight coming from the State Advisory Council for Gifted and Talented Education. So appreciate that comment. And Kathy's taking notes as well too with us. Any other thoughts on priority 1?
I think we all agree it's very important.
Yes.
Well,
All right, you want to move to priority 2?
yeah, let's move to priority number 2 then.
All right. Let me appreciate your patience as I pull the slide up so we can look at priority number 2. I will share. Go to priority number 2. Great.
Okay, so priority number 2 states that we want to communicate and provide guidance to school districts and families that assessment accommodations must be provided to students who have an individual education plan or 504 plan. So any thoughts, comments about how to implement, helping KDE communicate and provide guidance to school districts and families? And I know we've talked about assessment a little bit with the culturally responsive. I think that's really important. Thanks, Pauline, for bringing that to the forefront. But then also we want to think about students who have IEPs or a 504 plan as well.
Kathy, there are a couple of hands, and Joe, I don't know if you can see, there are a couple of hands up, and I don't know if my hand was first, so I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead of someone, but I would just like to ask the council, as they're thinking through this particular priority, I think, as they share your feedback with us, what is important for, and I'm sorry, Joe, can you put the priority back up? I was getting ready to say something based on it. It went away. What?
I was trying to
you
get
can put that back up for me so I can see it.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I've got multiple screens going, but I don't have that one up in front
And when you're in Teams, it does this little delay. So
okay.
it's tricky. But putting it back up for you. Thanks for
Okay.
commenting on this one, Natasha.
Okay, thanks. So it's still wanting, it's really, we're relating to accommodations for GT identification and testing. So with this priority, what is it that you all really want to get across to districts as it relates to this? I want to make sure I understand the heart of your priority as it relates to this particular statement. So,
Well, let me tell you what I think it is.
okay.
I think it's pretty basic.
Mhm.
Nice exceptional children, if they have an IEP in addition to the GSSP or a 504 plan, that those accommodations need to be put in place as they're being assessed for their giftedness. I think it's kind of just telling people that they must do that.
So the council's desire is to increase awareness of that in the assessment, in the identification process.
That is my take on it, but
Okay.
I may not have the take that everyone else has.
If it's okay, I'd like to kind of speak or ask about this. And once again, I know my hand was raised and I hope I'm not jumping in front of someone, but this was something kind of close to my district last year because it's something that I kind of struggled with a little bit. And not the struggle that where we were not planning to do this, but after speaking with our little cohorts that we have like in our region, it seems to almost like every district was doing something different. And so when we do the testing of like say every fourth grader, there was a question to come up that if they were already identified as special ed, do they receive their accommodations if they're being tested for the possibility of being gifted, whether it's GI or in a specific academic area? And so we had some students that maybe were and forgive me, I'm not, I don't know a lot of on the special ed spectrum of it with like the MMD, I think maybe the mild mental disability, that if the student was should receive accommodations to be gifted, to look at being gifted in a GI, because we give everyone that accommodation. And so for me, I thought this was important for more information. And I think one way we could get that out is that when I became a new coordinator and I was learning, I know the CAGE updates in the fall, the conferences in February, the summer update in August, like where a lot of these coordinators and gifted teachers would attend, any sessions that possibly could provide information on this would be very helpful. And then maybe even go back to the cohorts of within the region, because whenever I would look and ask different, districts were kind of doing different their own way with this. So I just think a clear, like what Dr. Roberts said, a clear definition of what this looks like would be helpful, and possibly provide scenarios on it. If this were the case, this is how you would handle it. Because as a newer coordinator, I was unaware of how to tackle this, if they received it, for if you were looking for GI or not. So sorry if I was rambling. I just thought this kind of hits home to my district.
Thank you, Hannah, for that. And as you know, we had new GT coordinator meetings monthly last year, and I think this is something that can be addressed at the new GT coordinator training in the fall, which I'm going to be talking about here in a few minutes. But also, it could be, these are things that here at KDE, when we have trainings and professional development opportunities, we can also, like you said, make sure there's a clear message about that. And also, I liked your ideas about the scenarios. I thought that's always helpful. I think when people can, have a certain picture of how that's supposed to look. So thank you for that suggestion.
So Kathy, is there a clear message that we could share? I'll be planning the cage update in late August. We have a date for that, the last Saturday, and it'll be virtual. Is there a clear statement that we can share?
Dr. Roberts, I think that's a really good question. Let me work with, look at the regulation and also get back to you on that, because I think that that's something that really needs to be thought about to make sure that the message is clear and concise, rather than just kind of blurt something out here today. Not that I feel like I would blurt, but I hope you know what I'm saying with that. So let me get back to you on that about, a message that we could share. I think that's a really good idea, though, to have a message.
And I certainly don't think you blurt things out, but it seemed to me that if we had a clear statement that everyone could see, it would be really useful, and probably that's what we need for priority 2.
Yes, and I like the idea about consistent messaging so that the state can really understand how this is playing out in various districts. And we are in the process of strengthening our communication as an office. And so we do have some communication channels we can help with, and that is through our newsletter, for our office newsletter. We also provide some information on our listservs for our education listservs. And then we also have a specific point of contact for our gifted and talented coordinators, which is Kathy. And so we do have an opportunity to communicate directly with our coordinators. So yeah, if the council can help us make sure we have the right message, we have the channels to get the information out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have some comments or feedback on priority 2?
I wanted to share something, and more so for clarification, as I learn through the council. So when we talk about accommodations for children who have IEPs and 504s, when I relate that to my prior statements about students whose first language is not English, it's almost as though we're trying to give students with an IEP or a 504 plan the language that makes the playing field level with everyone else, in order to identify gifted and talented students. So, for example, again, I'm thinking out loud. Say my family is originally from the Philippines, so the language is Tagalog. And so if my cousin who immigrates here is tested in English without acknowledging her culture and language, she's down here. But if she were to be tested in Tagalog and taken into account her culture, then she would be on a similar playing field. And then similar to that, students with an IEP or 504 plan, if that was to be considered, and which I believe and it should be, say it's not, say that the assessments are not used. I think, Hannah, you were talking about that with regard to special ed students. If they're not considered in this assessment, if their differences or exceptionalities are not considered, then the playing field is not level. Is that am I understanding that correct?
So what I hear you saying, Pauline, is that there seems to be language in the regulation for accommodations for special ed students, but you're wondering if there's language either in law or regulation, policy, best practice, I'm not exactly sure, for, students who have a second language. Is that what you're asking?
I think I'm just trying to understand, Kathy, if priority statement 2 is similar to my advocacy for students of a different culture and whose first language is not English. So, even though, say, a person with an IEP, say their first language is English, but they have a specific IEP because of their learning exceptionality. I'm just trying to equate and understand if the priority is to essentially level the playing field for all these students who have been identified. And with that, the reason I'm asking this is because as a regular parent in the society, I want to make sure that the message is super clear, especially for parents and gifted and talented coordinators, for general education teachers. So I'm almost thinking I need to put myself in their shoes in order to get the message across. Because in a world of so much information and misinformation, as a consumer, I need to have the most simple, direct soundbite possible to make sure that these priorities are communicated with the correct intentions.
I appreciate that, Pauline. And the way that I interpret that is focusing on making sure that we have available an assessment accommodation for students that deals with language and or culture. And so I just think that what you are asking is, are districts aware of that, and how are they messaging that to their stakeholders and their parents to make sure that parents understand that when they're working with their students, that this is something that districts are helping them with, and that's just another accommodation that would be available to a student. And so our job would be, how do we communicate and remind districts to keep this on their focus or their radar, to think about not missing out on this area, making sure that if they communicate that, parents are engaged and they see that as, oh, okay, they are helping my student meet a need. And so some parents won't say anything about that. They will just say, I assume that the district's doing that. But when districts communicate that, then parents see, oh, that's very helpful, and to me to be able to engage and understand and communicate with you on behalf of my students. So that's kind of how I see that playing out for you in this priority.
Thank you, Joe. You said it perfectly. You communicated exactly what I wanted to communicate from my head. And just as a side note, I think, Joe, your statement about how parents trust educators, especially parents who immigrate here from other countries, just from my experience with the people, the families in my church and my own family, my parents were hands off, and they trusted that I would do what I needed to do and to succeed. And I assume that they trusted the teachers. And I think that the families that I have encountered do the same, specifically families perhaps from the Congo. And they have such great trust in the teachers that they think, oh, okay, well, I don't have to, they'll identify the children. But because we don't have their perspective, it is yet another opportunity to engage the parents and to relay the importance of parent engagement and how how that plays a factor in the student's success.
Yep, that's great. And then the tricky next step is we have to give our districts tools to understand, to know how to do that. Because some educators are well versed and have support and resources and know how to do that, and some districts do not. And so I think that's what Hannah was speaking to there, is to really think about, this might be playing out in a district one way, but it may not be playing out this way in my district. And so our goal is to communicate and begin to build capacity across the state. Even if you don't really have the tools to know how to do it, you start working towards that. And so, and we look at our districts who do it well and think about how are they doing this? And let's get some training and assistance from them to do that. But the focus is on meeting the needs of the student and communicating with the parent. You're right. Thanks for that.
Thank you. May I ask a question, Jim?
Yes. Hey, Bryn, I'm glad you're with us.
Hi, thank you.
And you're
Yes,
in California, right?
yes, I am. So in addition to the time zone, we have some difficulty with the access where I am. So I'm glad I was eventually able to get on. And thank you for your indulgence. And I hope I'm not asking something that has already been asked. But I think also with this priority, we need to make sure that that if people are, first of all, in that we have to make sure that people are properly identified. Make sure maybe if there's some verbiage just to make sure that that testing has already been allowed to happen, that assessment has been allowed to happen in a timely fashion. I don't think it sounds like there could be a loophole there, because you say if there's a 504 plan. And so I think if we make sure that that's done timely, people have a better chance to make sure that they're being guided in the best way. But also, if people have not been properly identified, I'm thinking we need something to make sure that if they're identified later, is there some retest with those accommodations available? Does that sound like something we're already doing, or does that sound like something that would be fair to make some preparations for in our verbiage?
Bryn, I'm thinking back to the regulation, and the regulation does have a subsection that talks about districts must have an appeal process for parents if they feel like, or anybody, they need to have an appeal process if they feel like their student has been missed in the identification process. I think in a way your question would fall underneath there. But I think that the regulation also states that we need to be continually looking for students in grades 4 through 5 to formally identify them. And so hopefully, if a student was missed inadvertently, let's say in 4th grade or 5th grade, that when they got to middle school, and that's something that we've been doing some training on through the KDE trainings, is to ensure that people have still got a screening process to make sure that they are not missing any students. But all that to say, I think, every school year, that's why it's really important to have beginning of the year trainings as well as new GT coordinator trainings that address all these issues that you guys are bringing up. And I just really appreciate your feedback, because it makes my job easier as I go to pinpoint things that need to be addressed to hear your feedback. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. And also in my question is, if they go through an appeal process, or if, for some reason they just weren't identified in time for the testing, would they be allowed to go back and take that test with accommodations later?
I would think yes, if they were a student who, so are you saying if you had a student that when they originally, took an assessment or a screening or screened and had been identified for, as a special ed student, could they then go back and retake that test, given those accommodations?
Right, with the proper accommodations, if those weren't provided at the time, whether because they didn't have it or they didn't know that they needed it at that time.
Right.
It's
I'm wondering if you would give the same test or if you would give a different test, just because the student for validity purpose, you know, if you would need to give like if you'd given, let's say, the cognitive abilities test to all the students, if you would then go back and then give, you know, a different assessment. That's a really good question. And I do know that in the special ed world, and, you know, Natasha, you and Joe can speak to this maybe more, that, you know, districts do assess students, giving them the WISC and also the Woodcock-Johnson. So I'm wondering, you know, if you could be looking at those assessments as well for discrepancies, you know. So that's a really good question. I'm going to write that question down and have to get back to you on that, because I'm not sure. Natasha, do you have any feedback on that, or anybody else that has dealt with testing and assessment?
I think that one is kind of unique because we're looking at, you know, my world is special ed. So we're looking at a special ed student being tested for GT who could possibly be twice exceptional. And if I'm understanding correctly, if they were assessed the first time without accommodations, and then for whatever reason, the district decides to come back and assess them again. Is that the question?
I think the question is, if the student hadn't been identified as SPED the first time around, and then wasn't identified, but then they were identified for SPED, could you reassess them for the gifted program using the accommodations?
And that's based on the fact that they were assessed for the gifted program the first time before they were identified as SPED and they didn't qualify?
I think that's the way I took.
Yeah, I think for that, I think this is kind of a very specific scenario. So, you know, I think this is something that we'll just have to dig into, work on. I wouldn't want to try to give a solid answer for that right now, because again, it sounds like it's, you know, kind of very specific, and I think there's a little more that could go into it. So I would like, you know, to be able to dig into that, research it, because that is, those are some unique situations and scenarios. So, but I do appreciate that question, and definitely, Kathy, if you've captured that, I know I'm taking notes over here as well. And we can look into and work on that to get a more solid answer. So yeah, but thank you for that question, Brent.
Bryn, hi, this is Hannah. If I could add, I know in my district, and I feel like this is current with a lot of districts, that the schools will do benchmarks the fall, winter, and spring. And I know with the benchmarks that we use and a lot of the other neighboring districts, we use MAP. And our regulations, that MAP is a national norm test that we can use to even identify students. So we formally identify in 4th grade. However, my colleague and I think this is true for most districts, that we will skim those MAP scores of all students each year. We will look at those throughout the year. And that's kind of a safeguard, kind of a net for us to help in case if we have missed anybody inadvertently, or if we've got gifted students who has added a new area to gifted. And so that might help a little bit if on the new coordinators meeting, to kind of encourage coordinators and the gifted teachers to use whatever benchmarks their schools are using, to kind of just to survey that quarterly, to make sure that if anyone pops up or if anyone stands out that needs to be retested because they are close to that marking. So we are using that, and I think other districts close by are doing that as well. And but it's just one of those things that, you know, you have to be mindful of.
Thanks, Hannah. And Bryn.
Kirk's hand up.
Yeah, Kirk, do you have a comment or a question? We focused a lot on accommodations and assessment.
Yes, I was still thinking about assessment, and I am holding a thought that I had from Dr. Julia's comments. Bryn, that's a very timely additional comment and question. My suggestion to the staff, since there is a process for guidance documents, is to partner up with someone in the assessment and accountability staff, and maybe have an FAQ section, so we've mentioned a specific instance here, but some general FAQ, and see if the assessment and accountability staff could have a specific contact person that could be listed in the document when it comes to scenarios and individual student situations, just like what we are already encountering here in our discussion. So, it could be an FAQ. I have a student who, recently this school year diagnosed with a learning disability. Can I retest the student with gifted, with whatever instrument? And then the answer would be, yes, please contact Joe, in the KDE assessment and accountability office at blah, 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 that kind of thing. But I think it would show partnership across and collaboration, which is one of our big three technology skills for the KDE staff to work cross divisions. And that way, unfortunately for some teachers or administrators, when they see the assessment and accountability office, in play, they give it more attention. It shouldn't be that way, but that's the everyday. A lot of districts, pay heavy attention when something comes from the accountability.
Kirk, thank you for that one. Yes, and something that I'm thinking about, we're focusing on our priority statements and how we're going to align our work as a council. It may be that we think of presentations that we need as well, and possibly inviting somebody from assessment accountability to present to this group, and then have this discussion with them to think about how does this play out for our state, and shows the collaboration between our Office of Special Education and Early Learning, our Gifted Council, and our Office of Assessment and Accountability. And so I just think that would be a very healthy and helpful discussion to have with them, and then think about, well, now that we know, how do we message that, showing our partnership, and then how does that get out into the hands of special education folks and gifted and talented coordinators. So Dr. Roberts.
I had one other idea
Go ahead.
that doesn't perfectly fit, but since we are brainstorming, and I'm a school board member, and this week is our summer leadership institute. I'd like to take Dr. Julia's idea that our priority in this guidance document are a long-term project, and maybe already have a project deadline of maybe next April or May, and then see somebody from the department, somebody from the council give a presentation at the Kentucky School Board Association's 2023 Summer Leadership Institute. Of all the trainings, it's the most casual and has the most, quote, elective topics. The other two big trainings that they offer and are required are really heavy on the statutory requirements. But I would like that would be a really good, because school board members by and large are not professional educators, and it would be a really good way to get that message out to a broad group of people who govern our school districts. So just throwing that out there, maybe that could be our goal timeline and a unique audience.
Great suggestion. Thank you for that, Kirk. And Dr. Roberts, if you need certain presentations along the way throughout this next school year, Kathy and I can help coordinate on what's needed.
Thank you. And I think it will help if we get the message out to various role groups, certainly not just sticking with gifted coordinators, although I do support gifted coordinators.
Definitely makes sense. Yep.
Joe, would this be a good time to maybe just take a short break and then come back to priority 3?
Yeah, why don't we take about a 10, 15-minute break? So we'll come back at 10:45, give you a chance to take a break. Then we'll focus on priority statement 3. And then maybe at the end, Dr. Roberts, you can kind of try to pull all of this together to think about next steps, which most likely will be taking all this feedback and then beginning to prioritize and set out the work, aligned with the meetings that we have coming up this next school year. Of course, we wouldn't need to get that specifically mapped out, but we kind of get a direction on where we're headed. Does that sound like good next steps, Dr. Roberts?
Absolutely.
All right, sounds good. So we'll see you all at, you can stay in the meeting, just mute or turn your video off, and see you at 10:45. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, I have added the slide for priority number 3, and so Kathy's going to read that for us.
All right, priority number 3 is about social emotional support for GT students. Priority statement number 3 reads, highlight the importance of social emotional learning needs of our gifted students and gather resources that various role groups, such as school psychologists, counselors, and parents, can use to address the needs of students. So again, just looking for how y'all might like to partner with us here at the department to highlight this importance. I would like to just remind you that several years ago, we published I guess you would call it a guidance document about social emotional with the help of Dr. Ed Amon, who was on the council at the time. And that is posted on the GT Resources webpage, and I will put a link to that. But just as a reminder that we did create a guidance document for GT parents and GT staff, really anyone, not just, you didn't have to be gifted, about the social emotional needs of gifted students. But what are your ideas about, highlighting this importance?
Within the last, I think 18 months, the School Psychologist Journal published a special issue on gifted education, and in it they highlight the fact that school psychologists in many places get no training on gifted. And so we really have a role group in our school systems that may have very little information about the need to support children with gifts and talents. So maybe getting resources out to them could be especially important.
I know that here in Russell County that we are part of GREC, which is an agency in Bowling Green that provides professional development for all sorts of teachers. And, just seeing this, I just think like whether if GREC or another agency could provide maybe a 2-hour PD that is available, because I know that counselors like teachers have to continue with professional development. I'm not for sure about school psychologists, but I'm assuming, but if just making some PD available. I also know that before school starts that you have to have a list of different videos and trainings, and I am happy to report, and you probably know this as well, but on the suicide training that every teacher does, there is a portion represented there of a gifted student. And so that is, I'm thankful for that, because I think a lot of times people have the misconceptions that gifted students are great and happy and socially well adverse, and we know that's not the case. But I just think more training could be offered in a form of some extra PD possibly.
And if we're listing those resources someplace, Dr. Amon is going to do the BERTA for us here at WKU on the social emotional needs of gifted children and the well-being of teachers.
Thanks for including teachers, Dr. Roberts and WKU.
I did put that link to the social emotional guidance that the advisory council collaborated with Dr. Amon. So that's a link over in the chat there. And maybe, you know, as we talk about, you know, collaboration, maybe that's something else that we could do here at the department, is to reach out to the person who works with counselors at the department to maybe just partner on resources, or, you know, a presentation of some kind. I know they have a newsletter. Maybe that's something that we can reach out to that person, who I think is, I can see his face, but for some reason I can't think of his name right off the top of my head. Joe?
If you have any links, or, you know, if you capture that in video or anything, we can share that in our newsletter as well. We'll be glad to highlight that information. Thanks for putting that in the chat, Kathy. Any other feedback on priority number 3 on sharing resources? So I definitely see a common theme of communication and consistent messaging, and making sure that statewide, you know, educators in a variety of role groups are aware of the resources that they have available to help them begin to support students who are gifted and talented. And so, yeah, the discussion on in the brainstorming session and reflection has been very helpful. Kirk Haynes, go ahead, Kirk.
Well, I'm a little behind on my professional reading, but just to bring awareness to anyone who has a copy, this quarter, the topical issue in the Gifted Child Quarterly is social and emotional well-being of gifted students. One of the articles is titled, quote, "You are so smart," exclamation point, quote, "The role of giftedness, parental feedback, and parents' mindsets in predicting students' mindsets." So, whatever messaging or materials that the department could create, or in trainings throughout the state, maybe we should have a heavy focus on parents and parents' connectedness to their gifted children, because I'm raising a child who has traits of gifted and talentedness is unique anyway. And I know as a teacher and as a school board member, we're certainly looking for uncharted ways to live through COVID, keep our schools operational, but we are all recognizing that students are just different. Like, they have different developmental needs. Things were just missed when in the beginning of the pandemic, before vaccinations, and we're looking for ways, and if you will, give permission to our principals and their staff to really spend the first few weeks of the school year heavy on social emotional topics and building those relationships, and kind of giving them some grace, to not pedal so hard with their academic standards, that though we're reassuring them that students will perform academically and to standards, and but first we need to make sure that we have them in our arms, so to speak. So anyway, it's a resource, it's fresh. I bet Dr. Julia could speak to the publication in general, but there's some timely things right here that are just out.
Thanks for that, Kirk. That's great information.
Kirk, I thought that was just so well said. I mean, in all of the professional developments or trainings that I have attended, especially in the past year, that focus has really been on developing relationships with students, because we have been at such a distance from students that that's something that I think has been a real challenge, is for students to realize that we see them, that we care about them, so I thought that was really timely, what you just said. Thank you for that.
And I think, I mean, this is just personal, and I know we're brainstorming. I think all educators at all levels, classified, certified, administrators, higher education, we all are recognizing that our children and youth are different, but there's not a great big body of research to help put us, into good action steps. I remember I had a professor at Western when I was taking my endorsement courses who said, what's good for gifted kids is good for all kids. And so, like my own personal non-research evidence-based opinion is if we, the public school, doesn't stop and make sure that we have children's basic developmental needs met, that it won't matter how hard we push academics, those human beings are going to be lost in the future years. So I think anything, like, even if we make this one our first go-to as far as getting something actionable out there, that's how concerned I am for children in general. And someone mentioned earlier, adults. We are seeing adults leave mid-career. They're just walking away. And from a school board member's perspective here in Western Kentucky, we are not seeing college students, traditional students, pick up education as a major. And so that there's a lot of concern for the profession, having quality educators, and for our current staff and students.
Thank you, Kirk. Go ahead, Bren.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Kirk, for that observation. You're right. We do have to be very concerned about getting students wanting to get into the profession, and that means really helping identify a lot of the challenges and reasons why they aren't, and the things that are making it very difficult for them to continue, including pay and safety in many areas, and room to be honest about what's going on and what they think is better for students without fear of losing their jobs. And so I think that's a lot of pressure that's being put on our educators, as well as some of our parents. Some parents don't even want to speak up about things that they see or think should be done better for their students, because they're afraid then their students are going to receive even a worse brunt of whatever it is going on, especially dealing with bullying or unfair actions by teachers. So there's a lot that we need to do to create an atmosphere of trust in our schools. So I also wanted to add that when we focus on training, I really hope we do some intentional focus on affordable and even free training, especially for parents. And I'm not sure now if there's PDs that the teachers have to pay for. I think the schools usually provide those, but I know there's so much that they are already paying for, whether it's, travel or, additional materials. And so as we talk about the importance of getting this training, we want to make sure that people of all income levels and zip codes will have access to those, as well as means of getting to them if they're not virtual and so forth. Also, just really think that we need to also be aware that when we talk about whether or not kids are having problems or socio-emotional needs that are going unmet, one, some might not even realize they're not being met. And then we have some who don't want to admit that they're not being, that they're having these concerns. A lot of times, our society just make it seem like it's our fault that we're having problems. So, and I think that's why a lot of people try to act like they have it all together. And, including teachers and parents. And so, so I think we need to come at training from a different approach, because a lot of times when I talk to people, they'll say, oh, yes, I'm aware of that. Oh, I know that, but yet they might still be undergoing the problems and maybe experiencing some of the symptoms, but they don't want to delve into it because they think they know, everything dealing with that already, or feel like that doesn't impact them. That's other people who have those problems. So I really think we need to maybe try to get away from that stigma of, that's being something negative or something that's other people's problems, because we don't have that here. So, so that openness and coming at it from a different approach where people don't shut down or don't even pay attention to your presentations or what have you, because they think they know it already and they feel it's redundant. So we need some new approaches too. Okay.
I appreciate that, Bryn. And something that makes me think about is how important leadership is. And so we all know that we've had those leaders that have shown us the way for things that we didn't even know we needed, and cultivated a service-oriented type of support where, for example, I'm an adult and I see this leader that's helping me understand and cope with the things that I deal with. It begins to help me see areas in myself in growth and in attention I didn't even know that I had. And so that leadership area is critical, to have the skill set to be able to understand how you do that for students and kids. And so I think that's very important. I appreciate that comment, Bryn. Hannah?
Yes, I would just like to add, for what it's worth, 2 cents. I've attached a link to the chat, the Bounce Coalition. That is something that Russell County has just participated in for the past few years, and it is like an agency that is set up for this specific cause, just for all students, and they focus on ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it's kind of identifying early on the experiences that students have witnessed, whether it's their home life or their school, that could trigger or that's seen trauma that could trigger something more. And it's kind of a proactive measure, but it's also, I've just said, you can explore that website. There's trainings, there's resources. You can even apply to receive more training. And this is specifically for all students. It doesn't gear just towards gifted, but as Kurt mentioned earlier, what's good for gifted would be good for all students. So we just got out of this. And so I think it could add something to what we're speaking about. And also I was going to add, whenever this might be to Miss Kathy, I know that on our regulations that with each district that the gifted coordinator or teachers provide PD for teachers district wide. And so, whether that's in a PLC or at a faculty meeting or at a district open day. And, this could be something that specifically geared toward gifted students that teachers could be encouraged to add to that PD training that they're supposed to provide.
Hannah, yes, I think that is that's a topic that definitely could be addressed during professional development, PLCs. I just think it is a really important topic that I think it's hard to reach students if you don't have those relationships, if you don't know what they're going through, who they are, that type of thing. It's just really important that students feel like that you care about them. And I think that's all students, but thank you for that. I think that is a really good, important point to make, that as we think about professional development, training, topics that are going to come up in our, our small groups with our teachers, that is something that we know how to address. It's very important.
All right, any additional feedback, questions, comments, concerns on priority number 3?
I would add that the Cage Fall Workshop is focused on social emotional needs of gifted children, and it will be October 19th. I'm pretty sure that's right. And so you might put that on your calendars and help us share that information. I'll send opportunities to you, Kathy, so you can help give people options for what they can read, what they can participate in professional learning wise. As there's several things coming up, and all of us know that the social emotional piece is just incredibly important for our focus.
Thanks for that, Dr. Roberts. Like Joe mentioned earlier, our office has developed some new communication venues, and one of them is going to be an email that comes out weekly called Use You Can News, so we can put that in there. Also, we're going to be having a quarterly newsletter from our office, and so we can also put this type of information in that as well. So please send us any of those important CAGE dates or those BERTA dates that you were talking about earlier with Dr. Amon. That would be great.
I'll do it.
And Kathy, in the past, we've had CAGE updates on our meeting agendas, right? Is that something?
So if that's something that y'all want to add, that would be great, because Dr. Nettleton is our CAGE representative. If you and Dr. Nettleton want to get together and have a short segment on the agenda, that would be great. We can do that. And that's for anybody really that's on the
Yes.
as a member. If there's something that you want to say or talk about, please reach out to Joe or Dr. Roberts and I and let us know. That would be great, because we want these meetings to be generated by you, things that you want to talk about, things that you want to address. So back to you, Joe. Did you say you wanted to maybe have Dr.
Yeah, so
next steps?
Next steps, we have our 3 priorities defined. And then we also, through our brainstorming session, we've identified a lot of different areas that we could begin to focus some of the work on. And so I thought it might be helpful as a group, and Dr. Roberts can kind of give us an opening statement on how she sees this work kind of unfolding throughout our meetings the next school year, and then begin to give some sort of structure on how this work might play out. And then you all can respond with some feedback about how you see the work moving along. So does that sound good to you, Dr. Roberts?
It absolutely sounds good. So let me start out and in a very general way suggest how it seems to resonate with me. I think with our number 1 priority, we are talking about a short-term and a long-term goal. And the short term is to get a message out about the importance of equity in gifted education and talent development, and to get that message out to various role groups. And I think that could be in a commissioner's message. It could be in a message that goes out from a variety of different individuals at KDE, as well as the Kentucky Association for Gifted Education. But the long-term goal is to develop a guidance document that will provide information to districts about practices that will support equity in gifted education and talent development. And perhaps that started first by getting together the individuals at KDE who would be involved with that, and 2 or 3 people from the advisory council to sketch out a plan. And I think, Kirk, you were the one who provided a long-term date, perhaps next April, that would be our target for having something like that done. I find if we don't have target dates, things often just kind of go out into the great beyond without accomplishment. So I would say the short-term goal is a message that would happen prior to school starting. The long-term goal would be next spring, and perhaps April would be our date so that we would be ready for a new school year. To me, the second priority is much less formal. I think it is a specific statement that Kathy can put together and get approved in her area that would state, what do we mean when we're trying to clarify using accommodations when they are already in place? And of course, we're talking about using accommodations with gifted children who might be twice exceptional. And for our third priority, that too looks like it could happen very soon, and that's to gather resources that would support educators in various role groups as they're working hard to accommodate the social and emotional needs of all children, but specifically making sure that we don't leave out children with gifts and talents. So that's kind of how it appears to me, but I'm sure you on the council have other more specific suggestions to add to that. And your suggestions will be welcomed.
Thanks for that, Dr. Roberts. That provides some structure for us. And members, do you see any other focus areas that you would add to that?
Yes, this is Bryn. I would like to see us double check some of the checklists, especially as they pertain to the various areas of giftedness, and maybe, I don't know if the word metric would apply, but to try to include more guidance, especially for parents who might try to self-identify as far as what forms of evidence is good for them to have for that particular, art form, and if there's some, criteria for what's considered good evidence, or, at what point, because I think, we all would think our children are gifted in some way. And I think some parents, when they do go through either the appeal process or the trying to self-identify, I think a lot of people are protective in the fact that they don't want to be embarrassed, for you to have to say, oh, no, they're not. So, and them to have to argue with you, oh, yes, they are. So, so I think there's some protection there, and it might reduce the input that parents might provide in that regard. So I think if we could do maybe a better job at fine tuning some of what that criteria might look like, or suggested criteria, that it could be helpful as we also try to communicate to parents how to participate in that process of if the school didn't identify or said they weren't, how can we get our kids in that process if we believe that they deserve to be in other forms. So.
Yeah, but Bryn, just to piggyback on that, I think just to communicate that parents can refer their students to be assessed for the gifted areas. I think oftentimes parents don't even know that they can be a part of that process.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, so reiterating that as well as providing some guidelines and something to make them feel as though they they know what they're doing. And there's some, it's not just there's something more objective that they can submit with their subjective input.
I know as an agency and an office, we are putting high priority on stakeholder engagement and making sure we gather feedback from advisory group partners, from parents, from all the folks that we call stakeholders. And so I would just encourage the council to think about how the message for gifted and talented support is getting out to all stakeholders.
Right. And as members of this council, please get these messages out, that parents can refer their students for gifted services, and that if you're looking for, a form, it's usually on the district webpage. If it's not, there's usually a contact that's listed on the district webpage that parents can reach out to. Any other suggestions? Those are really good ones about parent awareness and providing guidance for parents to help them identify and refer students. I think that those are really great suggestions.
So Dr. Roberts, I guess the next steps would be kind of how we see this playing out over the course of our next few meetings, and we have our schedule set. It sounds like we have some, a goal to create some messaging, and Kathy can be helping that, working with Natasha and Veronica and others who she works with to get the right message ready. And then with your leadership as well, Dr. Roberts, helping to make sure we have the right message you want communicated. So can you speak a little bit to maybe the committee structure or presentations needed on how you see that playing out for the next few meetings? I know that you had mentioned we may need to seek a group with KDE staff who are working on guidance along with some potential council member representation, but how do you kind of see that playing out for the meetings that we have coming up?
I think that it would work very well if we had individuals who were especially interested in each of these priorities to kind of consult with Kathy and to keep these plans moving along. It is so easy for an advisory group to do nothing between times that we meet. And I, for one, would like to be more active than that. So I think it would be very useful to have 3 or 4 people who especially are interested in each of those priorities so that the work would keep going and not just be 2 or 3 months from one date to another. And in order to do that, I think we would have to open it up to a bigger group than is present today, but certainly including those who are here. And if you are especially interested in one of those 3 priorities, the second one actually, I think, is to get feedback to Kathy, but it's really the first and the third priorities that will have ongoing work.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then you can plan to set aside some time in each meeting to provide some updates from those groups that are working to gain progress so the full group is aware. And then for any areas that we feel like are unmet, we can provide some presentations and get speakers to bring in for some of those meetings. And so Kathy will help to organize those groups who are focusing on certain areas of work.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciate all of the reflection and brainstorming and ideas, because Dr. Roberts is exactly right. With most advisory groups, there is discussion, there's focus on priority, and then that next step is, well, what are some of the things that we could do? And then the next step of doing those things, sometimes some of those things get lost in the shuffle. And so what I would encourage you is to keep the list of things because they are all important topics. But then we have to be realistic about the work that we can do. I think Natasha mentioned that as well, is, we have multiple guidance documents going. And so we try to continue to work on it as much as we can, make some progress, and then at some point set some deadlines like Kirk did, and so that we can get some work done. So I think the group is on the right path. You have very specific and clear priorities. You have a lot of reflection and brainstorming ideas. You have some thoughts about let's do this in committee, or let's do this by volunteers saying, I want to work on this certain part of the work. We can invite speakers. Now we just have to map that out throughout the next school year and give some deadlines and make sure that all these things happen. And so, Kathy, what would be your kind of final word on doing that, just mapping that out, right? Making it happen.
Yes, I think that's a really good, those are really some really good next steps. And I would say that, if you're interested in any of these priorities and, working with me and Dr. Roberts and other, officers on these priorities, to just email Joe and I to let us know what you might be interested in.
And the goal would be to involve all members. And so to spread this out a little bit to make sure that, we have our areas of focus addressed, but we also have all of the members participating in an area. And so it could be that Kathy and Dr. Roberts and I will communicate back and forth to align members so that, we kind of evenly distribute that focus and that work. I know in some other advisory groups, the chair and co-chair help to align members. And if you're a member who may not specifically want to work on a certain area, just let us know and we can try to align that. But Kathy, I'm just thinking of how to make sure we have the members participating for each area of work and how we align that.
I think that's a really good idea, Joe. Of course, it's always helps to volunteer rather than be voluntold, right? So, but yes, I think that's a good way to distribute the work, because as you can see just from our conversations today, y'all had some really great ideas. And then now the next step is, how to make those ideas, some of those a reality, how to at least work on them towards a reality. So very good.
And what can get lost in the shuffle sometimes if there are so many areas to work on, I think it's wise for an advisory group to keep that on the list and continue to pass that information on to the next school year if it's work that hasn't moved or hasn't been worked on, but it's still an area that the council might consider. For example, we might work on a guidance document that's ready at the end of this school year and have it ready, but there may be another area that's kind of lingering or hanging out there that we would pass along for next year's focus. So hang with us on that and know that we're trying to balance out all of the work.
It's a really good suggestion because, guidance and types of things, they move slowly and they have processes they go through, which is why sometimes things move slowly. And so that's a good idea to keep that list in case, new members are appointed, that we're still all on the same page about what the priorities were and how do we want to keep working on those. That's a really good idea.
Natasha, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add as we're wrapping up, I think this has been great and I appreciate everyone's feedback. I just want to make sure that I wanted to share that as we talk about guidance, that we kind of keep an open mind, because guidance is not always a document. It doesn't always come in a form. Guidance and supports come in a variety of forms. They come in, and you all have talked about them, trainings, or it could be instructional video resources. So I just want us to keep in mind that guidance comes in all varieties of modes and formats. So, and it's not necessarily always a document, but the information and input you give and the need drives the format of the resource, shall I say. So I just want us to kind of keep that in mind as well as we're talking, so that we don't box into one particular of delivery as we look at how we can support our the GT community across the state. So I appreciate everyone's input and their brainstorming session. It's been really good and helpful.
Natasha, I appreciate that comment so much because I myself kind of catch myself being in a mode of, well, I got to produce a document, a Word document, because that's just how I've done things in the past. But it might be a social media market campaign where you put out information in a poster flyer format and you provide short, quick little brief things about how to educate the community. I mean, it can be innovative and creative. And so I really appreciate you thinking about that. And then the main thing is just us partnering together, KDE staff and our advisory group members, to think about what we realistically can make happen. Thank you for that. So any other members, and please provide some feedback or comments on things that on how you see this work unfolding. It may not be a document, it may not be a social media campaign, it may be specific to something you want to see. So please just let us know your thoughts. Any additional ideas from members?
Well, this might be silly, but Joe, when you had mentioned about the social marketing, I kind of thought, a lot of times like you and the other members, I get caught up in thinking of adults and meetings and trainings, but sometimes things can resonate more if it comes maybe out of the mouth of babes, so to speak, as children. So, I know that what if, you could take some of this information, whether it's the social aspect of it with bringing awareness, and, gifted kids across the state could work on whether it's not a TikTok video, but an educational TED Talk video that they could create, and that could be broadcasted at our CAGE conference, whether that's in February. It could be broadcasted at the Capitol whenever they do Gifted Education Month, and really let the students have a voice in some of this, because that might resonate more to parents and teachers as well.
Great point. And I think that's where Kirk was kind of pushing us to spend time with those kiddos and make sure we hear their voice. And so if we are taking time to really help them understand and express their ideas, then I think it's a great idea to hear from them on some messaging. So great idea, Hannah. Thank you. Any other suggestions or areas that members would like to see, how they would like to see this work evolve? Something that I have found in working with advisory groups, and it always amazes me how smart and brilliant groups are when we bring them together and they come up with great ideas. The challenge is taking those ideas and then making them happen and then following up on those. And so I just challenge this group to think about the tone and the energy today and the passion. How can we make that actionable? And in your planning, say we're going to help create some of these things. And so that seems to be the hardest part, is taking the great idea and then making it actionable. But I have seen that once a group begins to do that, there is some momentum and some members who really take hold of that and then feel responsible to make it happen. And then that seems to be the happy place for an advisory group. So Kathy, anything else?
Well, there was one more slide to share as I'm thinking about it, about the upcoming training opportunities.
I can pull that up.
And I've just gotten so excited about all the great information and great ideas that you guys are sharing that I just totally forgot to share what we've already kind of going here at the department. So we have a new GT coordinator training or video that we're going to record and then post for GT coordinators. And so that's going to be posted hopefully by, I believe, August the 1st. And then we've been talking about after the video, perhaps having a meet and greet with the GT consultant, so that if people have questions about anything that they have watched on the new GT coordinator training, they can have time to kind of like office hours or whatever to schedule some time to meet with me, or we could maybe do a small group, kind of like we do PLCs at schools, to talk about anything they saw in the video that they had questions about. So that's upcoming August the 1st. And then September the 1st, we'll have a beginning of the year training for all of our GT coordinators and / teachers, because sometimes they also play a dual role. And this will be updates on any new things that are coming out of the gifted education department program, and also any updates to the data standards that that we're working on now. So just please be aware of that and share that with people in your regions, that those trainings will be coming up soon. Does anybody else have any ideas of things? I know that y'all talked about already some other trainings and guidance documents, so I've written all of those down, so thank you for that. Does anybody else have anything that they want to share with us about some dates that are coming up in your districts, or things that you know of, Dr. Roberts, that are coming up for CAGE?
Well, may I share 2 or 3 things, not just dates, but things that I think will be important information. I think most of you know that Duke TIP closed a couple of years ago, and that the Center for Gifted Studies at WKU has initiated TIP Kentucky. We have been doing the above level testing of elementary children last year, and we will begin right away offering ACT assessments, off-level assessments, of course, to youngsters 13 and under, which has not been possible for the last 2 years. So stay in tune with us. It's so important for our youngsters to have the same opportunities they've had for years through Duke TIP. And so more information will be coming out with that. A second opportunity is the CAGE Center for Gifted Studies update on gifted education and talent development. That will be August the 27th, and we will do that online so that the update can be seen any place. Something else that I want to share, Jonathan Plucker and I have added to 2 special editions of Gifted Child Today with a focus on policy. And the first one should be coming out any day now. Why is policy important? Well, if you have good things happening in your district, they're more likely to continue if they are tied to policy. So this is policy that the first issue is looking at various types of acceleration, but the second issue that will come out in the fall is other types of policy. I think that's really important for us. And the last thing that I want to mention, many of you know Lynette Baldwin. I don't know if all of you know that she was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor this spring, and the changes have happened very rapidly. She's no longer able to speak or to move. So I would encourage you to keep Lynette in your thoughts. She's a dear friend to some of us, and probably all of us have known her for lots of years. So I thought it would be important to share that information. It's been really hard to share. Lynette's been on this council for a long time.
Thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Roberts. Go ahead.
That's really what I had to share.
Okay, I thought somebody else had a comment, but we will keep Lynette in our thoughts and prayers. Appreciate that. And so I would encourage you to look at the areas that we've talked about today for messaging whenever there are trainings and events this summer, and continue to pass along the areas that we've talked about today with your constituents and the folks that you work with. Are there any other closing comments? I know our commissioner, Dr. Glass, has joined us today, and so we're excited about that. He's going to provide some closing comments for us, and I really appreciate him taking time because, as you know, his schedule is crazy busy, and so I appreciate his time. But is any closing comments before we get to Dr. Glass? All right. Dr. Glass, thank you for joining us. We've had a great day of a focus on gifted and talented education and support today, and we've looked at some of our priority statements and talked and had a brainstorming session about how we see the work playing out over the next school year, and we're very excited about that. But I want to give you an opportunity to provide any closing remarks for us today.
Thank you. Yes, I would. I'm in the car, so it's another one of those crazy busy days. I hope to find a place to pull over so I could see all of you. But I'm apparently in a place in Western Kentucky. It seems like a stretch of about 150 miles with no exits, so we'll get through it as best we can. I did appreciate hearing Dr. Roberts' updates, and thanks for that recap of the things that you've talked about in the course of the meeting. Gifted and talented education is vitally important. As an example of one of the ways that we can customize education to fit every student's needs. That's really at the heart of what we should be trying to do for every one of our children in schools, is think about what are their individual gifts and talents, and what are their needs, and how can we customize the experience that they have for that. I had the chance to say a few marks to the Western Kentucky Education Cooperative's kickoff event this morning. And one of the things I talked about was that we stand at the precipice of what may be our first uninterrupted year of learning since 2019. And so that's a tremendous opportunity for us. I know that there are lots of concerns around learning loss and how much we have to catch students up, and we should work on that important issue with a lot of attention, to put a lot of energy into that. But we also should recognize that we're not likely to recover from that in just 1 year or 2 years. It may take some time. So we need to work diligently and keep a focus on it. But we shouldn't let it consume all that we do, because there's a whole lot of things that our children need right now. And the thing that they have missed most over the course of all these disruptions is the human connections and relationships. So I think if we can lead with restoring those and making sure that those are strong, and work on how we can reconnect students with school, make sure that they are in love with school. And one of the ways that we do that is we make sure that it's relevant and meaningful to them. Then we're on the right path. And to do that, I believe that we all have to recommit to education and consider the reasons that we got into this profession, which for most educators that I know, they got into the profession to support and help young people. They got into it to be part of something bigger than themselves, and they got into it to be connected to the future in a meaningful way and serving their communities. So I think we've got, as educators, to rediscover and recommit to that spirit going into this year as well. I'll stop here and just see if there's any questions or comments or feedback that folks have. If not, I'll continue my drive across Western Kentucky and wish you all the best.
Well, Dr. Glass, we thank you for joining us as you travel through the western part of our state. It is so important to keep the message strong that although we have learning loss, we also have students who are at grade level or above, then for them, it is so important that they're learning every day too. Thank you.
Yeah, completely support and agree with that. We really have to think about where every child is and how we support them individually.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glass, for being with us. Members, any other members have any questions or feedback for Dr. Glass?
This is Bryn Martin. Yes, I just want to thank you for joining our call and thank Dr. Roberts for her leadership. And I'm sure there's some way we can take some aspects out of her book. She has a book on an introduction to gifted ed. And I'm sure many of you already know that. But if we could find a way maybe to take some of that insight and experience and put together some things that or encourage people to put together it. And as much as we can help, I'd love to put something together when kids get back to school so that perhaps after school programming, or we could find some way during the day so that their days aren't so long. And then like some of the Saturday workshops that we used to do. But we do, I agree, we don't want to overly be inundated with concern about the gap and the loss. But I agree, it's so important that we do try to curb that as much as possible and build on it and get people excited about getting away from that and watching their own growth so that they can feel confident and see what we are all doing on their behalf and what they're doing for us. So I think that's important too, to make them realize how important we need them as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Bryn. All right, Dr. Glass, thanks again, and safe travels.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Glass.
Have a good day. All right. Such a great opportunity when the commissioner can drop in and provide some ideas and focus. So I appreciate that connection. And it was a good wrap up to our meeting, I really felt like, and to keep the main thing, which is vision on for our kids, and so definitely glad to hear that. So Dr. Roberts, you want to close us out?
I so appreciate all of the ideas that have come forth in our discussion today. So let's work together to put them into reality, to make something happen with all of these good ideas. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn this meeting. This is Pauline Covington.
Hi, Pauline. And a second?
I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Bye.
I am so happy to see you. Have a wonderful rest of the summer, but respond as we send out information to you and let us know how you want to help gifted and talented children in Kentucky thrive. Thank you so much.
A link to the exit slip, and I'll email it as well. So have a great day. Thank you.